Hi everyone, Rukshan here, and thanks for joining me on this live stream. Today I wanted to look at the 4 phases of our way out of this pandemic as put forward by our government yesterday, namely our Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Now, I'm going to have a general look at this. I'm not going to go into too much detail about each phase. More so just looking at the language and the way it's been presented and the way the media has also reacted to, these 4 phases. The first thing I want to look at is the language of the actual, one of the posts that Scoman put out last night, and what he actually also said, which is that this is a new deal for Australians. Now, maybe I haven't been paying attention, but I wasn't aware that there was an old deal for Australians that the government had made us aware of. Everything had been kind of just rolling on since the beginning of our 14 days to flatten the curve, and then all these new things that just keep getting added on, right? So was the 14 days to flatten the curve, was that the original deal that ScoMo is talking about? Now, because language is very important, so it's very crucial that we try to figure out what the old deal is. And I think that there was never an old deal, and this way of presenting this as a new deal for Australians, makes us feel like we're a part of the equation in all of this. We're a part of the, we've had some sort of input into the Prime Minister approaching us with this new deal. And, I don't think that's actually the case at all. We've never asked for any such deal from our government. I think a lot of people have just asked the government to leave us alone and stop interfering in our lives. And we've asked the federal government especially to kind of, take a closer look at what the states are doing and perhaps maybe stand up for the rights of Australians during this time in this country. So this New Deal language, I think that's all kind of just marketing spin. If anything, I think this is a new, deal for the government and the state premiers to kind of come together and rehash the failed vaccine rollout, the initial vaccine rollout goals that they've had that have been pushed back further and further and further back because of all sorts of issues. Most notably, of course, the problems that have arisen with, our country's acceptance of the AstraZeneca vaccine. And over the last week, that's just imploded in this kind of dramatic fashion where you have Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Premier from Queensland, as Chief Health Officer. You've got some other premiers and other health officers making comments about this vaccine, which really just kills any kind of confidence the public, had remaining in it. It's almost like these premiers were just like handing out the last rites to AstraZeneca. The eulogy, they were reading out the eulogy last week, because that's kind of, where we're at a crossroads where, that's kind of down the bin, and there's lots of reasons for it, and I'm not going to go into those reasons because I've been covering them over the past few months. And I think a lot of the media has also been covering them in some manner or form, maybe not to the same level of transparency around why these things are happening, but it's very obvious that this New Deal kind of centers around rejigging the vaccine rollout. Now, the next couple of words we have is the pathway out of COVID-19 that will see life gradually return to normal. Now, so this new deal that Scott Morrison's given us is our pathway out of COVID-19. So we're meant to believe that everything the government was doing before this wasn't the pathway out of COVID-19. It was just like whatever they were doing. And now all of a sudden there's a new deal, this new planning and these new thoughts that they've come up with that's showing us this pathway out of COVID-19. So on the face of it, it sounds great, right? There's a new deal for us, and it's the pathway out of COVID-19. But then the next couple of words kind of gives it away that this is actually not as straightforward as it seems, because then we have that will see life gradually return to normal. The use of the word gradually return to normal it shows that this pathway out is not something that's very definitive, in the sense that you do A plus B and that equals your way out of COVID. No, it's a gradual thing, and as we've seen over the past few months, anytime there's any sort of rollout or a gradual plan for something, things can change. So again, this new deal for Australians doesn't seem very different to anything that's been happening before. It's just the new use of these new terms that they've clinged on to now. Anyway, so that's the kind of language from his post that it's not very clear in my eyes. And then we got these four quadrants. We've got the current phase 1, 2, post-vaccination phase, 3, the consolidation phase, 4, the final phase. Now, when I look at this, this kind of reminds me of when I was at university writing essays, and before we actually, for some of our subjects, particularly in law school, before we actually submitted some of our essays, we actually had to submit a plan that we were going to put together for the essay itself, so the lecturer could see, hey, this student is on track, he's kind of understood the topic and he's going to be covering the correct points. This actually seems like that, because these phases which have been announced, there's no clarity around this is exactly what's going to be happening. This is more like a wish list and a maybe list of things that the government plans to do based on information they'll find out once they do their research. So once they look into the topic that they're writing about, these are the things that they kind of think will come up, and these are the things that we'll address to get to the crux of whatever we're discussing. In the same way, these four things that I'm seeing here, these four phases, very much remind me of that. If I start with the current phase, phase 1, which is what we're doing currently apparently, which is to continue to suppress the virus. Okay, that seems in line with what's happening now. If we look at what the governments are doing, measures include. Okay, very important, we see here measures include, so it's very clear that this is what's happening right now. Offer every Australian an opportunity to be vaccinated as soon as possible. Now that first point, and look, I know there's a more detailed map to all this, and this is like the shortened version for social media consumption and to make it really easy for people to understand. But it's very important that we look at it in these terms, because this is what they expect the majority of people to see. And when the news breaks it down and stuff like this is the kind of charts that they show you. So the first one we have is offer every Australian an opportunity to be vaccinated as soon as possible. Now that could mean anything. As soon as possible leaves it open to so many different variables. Offer every Australian an opportunity to be vaccinated. Okay, so all these things, it's not a definitive, so it's all kind of up in the air. But that, that's what's happening right now. They're trying to get everyone vaccinated. Second point, lockdowns to be used only as a last resort. The media really hooked onto this line. This worked really well for the government, I think, that this use of the word last resort, like the way it was portrayed in the news was that, the government's come up with this plan with the state premiers, and lockdowns will only be the last resort. So, government and the premiers are doing a great thing at National Cabinet. And when have you ever, a premier of ours in any state, I'm going to use Daniel Andrews in Victoria, when have they ever come out and said, we're just doing lockdowns because we just thought that's the best one to do? No, they always say it's the last resort. We didn't want to do a lockdown. This is our last resort. So it's always been like that, and I think this should not be said that lockdowns only used as a last resort, because it feels like it's the only resort that our leaders take, because we haven't seen other steps that they've tried to take when there's 1 or 2 or 3 cases, right? For a glimpse there in New South Wales, we saw them try something different, but then they went into a lockdown. So yes, this statement is, correct in a way, but it kind of implies that lockdowns have only been used as a last resort until now, and that's not the case. They've always kind of been the first option that our leaders have gone to. Last one, so current phase. This is the New Deal. Remember, this is a new deal for a deal. A deal usually implies like this is something that's kind of maybe a good thing. Temporarily reduce current commercial passenger arrival caps by 50% due to increased risk from the Delta variant. Okay, so our current New Deal for Australians includes temporarily reducing the amount of passengers that we intake from overseas, the amount of Australians that we let back into this country, right? Okay, so this is actually something that they're doing. So we can actually say this is definitively something that they will do, a 50% reduction, because that's, you can measure that, right? They can just halve the number of people that are coming in. It's very different to the first two because those are kind of subjective to so many different things. So yeah, current phase, yeah, it's kind of accurate. If we go to phase 2, post vaccination. So I'm assuming that means that after everyone is, majority of Australians have been offered a vaccine and they've taken it, we are in the second phase, which is the post-vaccination phase. And that says preventing serious illness and deaths from COVID-19. Now, I would have thought that we didn't need this clarification because isn't that what we've been doing since we started doing all these preventative measures, since we started doing all these lockdowns, since we went through like 7 months of crazy lockdowns in Victoria last year? That was all about preventing serious illness and deaths from COVID-19. Flatten the curve was about preventing serious illness and deaths from COVID-19. Almost every single thing we've done up to date has been about preventing serious illness and deaths from COVID-19. If you ask anyone in the government, if you ask your chief health officers, people in the media, the experts, they will all would have said at one point or another that everything that we're doing up and now is to prevent serious illness and deaths from COVID-19. So I guess I'm just saying it's a small point, but language to me is very important, and them saying these things like it's some grand new deal for us, it's not the case. So then we go to measures may include. So we've got here on phase 1, measures include. Phase 2, measures may include. So the use of the word may, I mean, that kind of throws everything into a big question mark, because once you put may in there, everything that's listed below it, there's no definitive around any of it. So the new deal that's been offered to us is, a maybe. And think about it. If you went anywhere else to get a deal, you went to buy a car or something, and the salesperson came up to you and said, look, this car may have an engine. It's a problem, right? Like, you wouldn't want to buy the car. So you need to know these things before you kind of accept this deal. But we're being asked to accept this new deal for us with measures which may come into effect. So this can be construed in multiple ways. One way is that the government doesn't know whether they will have to do these things. The other way is it's kind of like a threat almost, in the sense that, if we don't achieve some of this stuff here, particularly around the vaccination thing, these things may not eventuate so soon. So there's that element to it as well. But let's get into the meat of the phase 2. So we've got ease restrictions on vaccinated residents, such as lockdowns and border controls. All right, so that one is causing quite a lot of discontent within the population, particularly those that view this as an issue of our right to have a choice in terms of whether we will take a vaccine to be allowed to travel within this country. It's one thing to have a country outside of Australia say that if you're entering as a non-citizen, you can't come to this country if you're not vaccinated. That's possible. Countries have all sorts of rules and laws. But once you start doing stuff within a domestic population, once you start doing stuff within domestic borders, where you have a federal government, you have a country like Australia, You have a constitution, and you have certain guarantees for people to be able to travel freely within the country and be, under the same kind of guise as Australians. When you work, when you have a job, you pay income tax, and the federal government collects it. So, even though you're in Victoria, so there's certain things that we do, even though we're in states, that's federally recognized, and there's certain responsibilities that the federal government has. That's how we're set up. So once you start mandating things like you got to be vaccinated to have less restrictions on your life, such as lockdowns and border controls, you're going into a very kind of grey area in terms of, I think, constitutional legality. Now, I am not a practicing lawyer, but I did go to law school, and just from my basic understanding of constitutional law, I think there would be, definitely people that would be looking at this issue as an issue about people's right to move freely within their country. And should the federal government have a responsibility to protect those kind of rights without requiring a vaccination passport as such, or requiring you to show that you can, you're vaccinated before you can travel somewhere. So I think this is going to be one of the big ones, and it's very cowardly of the government, to be honest, because I feel like this is definitely something that's going to happen, only because they've been talking about things like vaccination passports, and they're implementing all the systems for this to happen, and to think that they still can't bring themselves to say definitively that they're going to do this is just so wrong, just to leave it up in the air like a veiled threat. Anyway, second point, lockdowns only in extreme circumstances to prevent escalating hospitalization and fatality. So lockdowns only in extreme circumstances to prevent escalating hospitalization and fatality. Again, with that phase 2, that point 2 on phase 2, isn't that what we've been doing? Wasn't flatten the curve about preventing escalation of our hospitalization rates? Wasn't that what flatten the curve was all about, to make sure our hospitals aren't overwhelmed? That was the first deal, flatten the curve, right? If we're looking at it in terms of deals, we don't want to overwhelm our hospitals, so we've got to flatten the curve. Now, in the new deal for Australians, it looks like we're back to the same thing. We will lock you down in order to prevent escalating hospitalization. Now, there's two things here at play that's not being made very clear. They kind of alluded to it. I think the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Kelly, when he spoke after the PM, when they were talking about this, they were talking about potential new variants. See, right now, this whole phase, all these 4 phases, are based on the assumptions around this Delta variant, right? And they're saying they're going to do modeling on the Delta variant now, because they've done the modeling on the Alpha variant. That's no longer relevant. We've got the Delta variant now as the variant of concern, and this is the one that they're going to do the new modeling on before they figure out what the rate of vaccination should be of the population. I think the reason that they're putting in May here is because there's a possibility that they will say, or there'll come a new variant. Now, we've heard of Delta Plus. There could be some other alphabetical Greek alphabetical name that they've used for another variant that pops up. There's no guarantee that the Delta variant that we have now is the end of it, unless, of course, they all know that there's something that we don't know, the population doesn't know, but all the leaders are confident now that Delta variant's it. And I think this is all kind of there to, in case we do have some sort of new variant, that these vaccinations that we're being told to line up and get the jab for, become useless, completely useless against these new variants. So, and they might need to lock you down again, even though you're vaccinated. So don't for a moment think that because you're lining up to get vaccinated and getting these jabs, that 80% of the population will be vaccinated, that there won't be any future lockdowns. The way they're wording it leaves it very open for there being future lockdowns and future restrictions going forward. Third point, restore commercial passenger arrival caps and have larger caps for vaccinated returning travelers. So pretty much this last point fixes up the 50% reduction they did in phase one. So a part of the new deal is about getting what we had previously in our old deal, which is having people come in here. So, why is that a great thing? It's just whatever, right? Larger caps for vaccinated returning travelers. So if you're vaccinated, you can come back in larger numbers. That is kind of new, obviously. We haven't really heard language or them speaking about having lots of people returning who are vaccinated in one go. But again, that is still up in the air. I'm not going to spend much time on post phase 2 anymore. Phase 3. Move to managing COVID-19 as an infectious disease like any other in the community. So you would think that this is kind of alluding to it becoming, I think Scott Morrison may have even said this, but we treat it like the flu, influenza. So COVID-19 has become kind of the new normal. The new normal, right? It's just a normal thing, normal part of our lives now. But even then, when it becomes like any other, like the flu or whatever, where we're going to treat it like the flu going forward, measures may include still no lockdowns. So couldn't there be a definitive answer? If we're going to treat it like we treat the flu now, do we have lockdowns for the flu? Do we have lockdowns for other infectious diseases like this? No, not really. Never really. Not to this scale at all, right? So why is it so hard not to say definitely there will be no lockdowns if that's how we're going to treat it? Like, why is it so up in the air? Second point, no domestic restrictions for vaccinated residents. So look, if we're at a point where we're treating COVID-19 like the flu, why would there not be? Why would there need to be a differentiation between vaccinated and non-vaccinated? Like right now when we have a flu outbreak or the newest strain of the flu for the year, no one's talking about restrictions on people's lives. That's not something we do. So are we really going to be managing it like any other infectious disease in the community? It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like it's going to get its own special set of controls and conditions around how we manage it. So again, the use of the word may and these two kind of things which don't really gel with it being treated like something that's a normal part of our life, it really throws me off. Easing open international borders, no caps on returning vaccinated travelers. So we open up our international borders. If you're vaccinated, I'm guessing from any part of the world, maybe just Australians, but there's no kind of cap on how many people can return. So I'm guessing, you'll have regular flights coming in. As long as you can kind of prove you're vaccinated, there's no issues for you coming into the country. Look, I mean, that's kind of new. Obviously, it's an obvious one. I don't know why we need it in this is going to happen in the future. Like, that's obviously we need that to happen, right? It's not something to celebrate. It should be just a normal part of our lives. And then 4, the final phase. Australia opens back up. That's the big one, right? That's what we want. So this new deal for Australians is really about the final phase where we open back up. But even in the final phase, measures may include. Okay? So again, a may. It's not like, Australia just opens up. No, we might have more measures. So what are the measures? Allow uncapped inbound arrivals for all vaccinated people without quarantine. Okay, and the second point, which is similar, allow uncapped arrivals of non-vaccinated travelers subject to pre-flight and on-arrival testing. So this really goes to the not so much a new deal for people in this country and in terms of how we handle this COVID thing or how we handle restrictions, lockdowns. This is more about all that's kind of settled now. How we're going to handle people coming back into this country. And again, that revolves around vaccination status clearly. But the thing is, the second point where they say of non-vaccinated travelers subject to pre-flight and on-arrival testing. So you're going to have people who are unvaccinated coming into the country. Now, I don't know if that's referring to Australians as such, or people from other countries, but that's kind of a really interesting point to me. Because, see, even though in Australia we're talking about, vaccinating people for domestic travel purposes, for instance, there's going to be plenty of countries around the world where they don't subject their citizens to this kind of testing requirements. I'm not talking about socially underdeveloped nations around the world, or third world countries. No, I'm talking about Western nations similar to Australia. Not all of these countries, even in Europe, in the Americas, whatever it is, they're not going to be forcing people to get vaccinated to have their freedoms back. A lot of people are going to be revolting against those kind of measures. So if we open this country back up, obviously there's going to be tourists that are going to be available to come to Australia to travel and boost the economy and all these kind of things, but they won't necessarily be vaccinated as such. So either we start forcing anyone that comes to this country to be vaccinated, which the government might decide to do for whatever reason, or we start allowing people that aren't vaccinated from parts of the world to come here as tourists and quarantine and travel about the country freely. So that kind of is the way I interpret that. If someone else has a different thought there, let me know. But having seen that last point, really makes all of this phases look like it's the new vaccine rollout, the COVID shield plan, just to ensure that people in this country are taking the vaccine, because through saying that you'll get these certain freedoms if you don't vaccinate. Domestically you're going to be not allowed to travel and stuff. But we're seeing eventually in the final phase that even the unvaccinated from around the world will potentially be allowed to come back to the country. So all of this stuff leading up to it is just to ensure that as many Australians will take this vaccine. And I wish it was just communicated in those terms without having to use these 4 phases that don't really add to anything. That's my honest opinion. Now, I'm not one to get into political ideologies here, but for me politically, I'm very much more inclined to support a Liberal government, or inclined to support Scott Morrison and some of the things that he does. But I think in this case, these people are just playing with us. They're just toying with us. They're just throwing out these fancy charts and fancy ideas. There's a lot more at play here. A lot of this is more about just making sure that people take the vaccine. You will notice that this whole thing came about, these 4 phases came about after the abysmal failure of our vaccine rollout and the very public failure. I think it was humiliating as well. I watched a dude, a Liberal MP on Q&A the night before these new phases were introduced, and he was apologizing and saying sorry. Sometimes during some of these pandemics and stuff, when governments are making tough decisions, they make mistakes. And I think with some of the choices around the AstraZeneca vaccine and the way that it was handled, there were clearly mistakes made, and a lot of misreading of data, and of course the public's sentiment as well, which is very important, because once the public starts rejecting a product, and once that momentum builds, it's very hard to change that course. And once you have Anastasia from Queensland coming out and saying this AZ jab is not good for not really good, the government's stuffed this up, it's hard to recover from that. And the only way you can kind of put all that aside is by introducing this new deal, right? This new phase. And what that allows the government to do is, when people question them about, so the vaccine rollout didn't go to plan. Okay, what does the government say? Well, don't worry, we have this new 4 phases that we've introduced. What do when other party members of the Liberal Party are questioned about this? What did they say? They said, Scott Morrison's introduced a 4-phase plan, and we're just in phase 1 now, and it's going good. Phase 2 should be coming soon. It's always going to be phase 3 is on the way. Phase 2 went well. It'll be like these kind of this language that they use, and the way that they've left it very kind of open with the use of the word may, means that these phases, the things that are in there right now, will change, will continuously change, and there's no actual certainty. It is not clear today the same way that it was not clear the day before these phases were introduced as to where we are going as a country. And to think that the media has latched onto this and are selling it to the people as, hey, look, we've got a way out of this, it's just to make them forget about the last few months where nothing has happened, where the vaccine's just gone to crap, and just kind of, take this new leap of faith in the government. And I don't think, this is going to go exactly how Scott Morrison is thinking, and it's going to be a very damaging exercise, I think, for him and probably even the Liberal Party when some of these things don't go to plan. I think, what we're asking for is honesty, the truth. A lot of us have already known about these phases. Things that are happening in these phases are what people were calling, people conspiracy theorists for, saying that, you're saying the government will treat the vaccinated and unvaccinated differently. Well, clearly it's happening now in Australia. It's being put into writing that could be a possibility in this country. Now, I'm going to make another video later on about my thoughts on this, vaccine segregation, vaccine apartheid, separating people within their own country based on their medical choices, which I find very troubling. I'm going to be working on a video on that. But look, guys, thanks for watching this live. I apologize it went for a bit longer, and if you're still here, thanks for staying along. But yeah, a lot of the times when I make these videos, a lot of people say, hey, Rukshan, you just stick to doing your video and photos. You're not a doctor, you're not a lawyer, or you're not a politician. Ridiculous, right? As Australians, this new deal from ScoMo is for Australians. Now, I'm an Australian, and I think all of us should be talking about these issues and sharing our thoughts and ideas. What they don't want us to do is talk about these things in this way and come to our own conclusions, right? We can see for ourselves all this information. We can make up our own minds. And in my case, this is my opinion on all of this, and I definitely don't think that it is all as good as it seems the way it's been presented. Anyway, guys, thank you, and see you guys all next time.